Take one.
Take one.
We're rolling. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm excellent. Let's get into it because we only have 26 minutes.
That's it. That's all.
So, can you share with us your name and the original spark for the stew?
My name is Maurice, at least for now. And the original idea for the stew emerged in the pandemic. The original idea was that I was going to bring people together, do these live events. We would feature, let's say you would be one of my guests. I would want to have you pick a meal of significance, something that spoke to you, something that made you think about childhood. Then I would recreate that meal, and then I would bring in, let's say, 4 of your closest friends. We would then engage in the meals together. We would talk about, did I hit the nail on the head? Does it remind you of home? Does it remind you of the things that you had the first time? And then we would talk about your journey with the people around you and why sort of you chose those people. That was the original idea. But then the pandemic happened and no one wanted to come together. So I had to think about something else that served the purpose. And so we then started with a cookbook that would feature Black men, where they would tell a story, meal of significance, journey, but separate like the sort of like coming together part. It grabbed some legs. We had a few entries. I think about 16 of them. But during that time, I was like, there has to be something else. This wasn't dynamic enough. And so it may have been right around like Juneteenth. I was like, I know a lot about history. I know a lot about food. And I know a few people who I could do this together with. And so we brainstormed an idea. I called Tristan and I was like, let's design a thing and let's see what happens. Long story short, I put something out on LinkedIn. A few of my friends responded and I hosted our first workshops. The workshops looked at the movement and history of food and used a cultural moment like Juneteenth and historical moment like Juneteenth to really sort of think about why are those moments important, especially for Black folks, and then bring that into a corporate environment. So the stew ultimately became an experience company overnight. I hosted my first 5, and we got a lot of really positive feedback. We made some dope meals, took some really cool pictures, and we got people who you would never guess to talk about conversations around Juneteenth to talk about it.
So it sounds like you really started this business from a need. So reflecting on the community the stew serves, what challenges did you see that you knew that you had to address?
Most of the things I think about in life come out of my own personal needs. So at this point, I was living in the Bay for a bit. My time in the Bay, especially the earlier part, was really centered, unfortunately, around like depression and loneliness. I struggled to make friends. I struggled to figure out like how to make it all make sense. I grew up in a very Black place. I went to Morehouse. I experienced life in a very different way. And then when I got to the Bay, particularly, I want to make it clear, like I was in the South Bay, I was on the peninsula. I was one of very few people that had similar experiences like me. So I experienced a bunch of microaggressions. I experienced the world in a way that made it really tough for me to fit in. And it took me coming to Oakland, it took me like really starting to build some community to realize, oh shoot, maybe there's something here. So I started hosting events as the entry point. And so when I think about the pain point that I was solving, I was trying to solve my lack of community. I was trying to create a space that would bring me to a moment where, I get to experience something with someone else. And so that's really where it came from. And then what I quickly realized throughout that time was that, there were a lot of people who wanted to build meaningful community. There were a lot of people who wanted something more than just, the turn up that we were used to. And I really saw the need there. When I think about my work, at that point I was leading diversity and inclusion. I got tired of going to the same like microaggression workshop, the same bias workshop. And I was like, there has to be something different. There has to be a new way to think about how to engage people, how to create learning, and how to create community. And I brought my interests together, and thus the stew was born.
And so the stew then offers unique experiences, to your point, and they're deeply rooted in culture. Could you describe these solutions and how they celebrate Black culture through food or culture more broadly?
Yeah, I was actually going to say, I think what we do is really sort of get this idea of this culture broadly in the work that we do. You know, I spent the last 10 years thinking about what does it look like to create inclusive cultures, and I think one of the biggest parts of that is really sort of centering folks that aren't always centered. And so a lot of what we do is to provide narrative, context, history, and facilitation around things that you often wouldn't talk about in the workplace. So when I think about it, it's like, I know that these like heritage months exist. I know that people were tired of the same sort of things that you do in the workplace. What if I brought a new spin to that? What if we created and shared a meal together, learned some history? You also got to learn like how to engage people around this particular holiday. And what I found is that was kind of the secret sauce. That was a thing that got people excited. When I think about it, or it's like take a step back, I really do think that one of the missing parts or missing components of how we engage both in and out of workplace is we don't really spend enough time really crafting and thinking about what needs to go into it. And so part of why the name The Stew is important is because it's about bringing cultures together. It's about infusing flavors. It's about making things that you wouldn't automatically assume would go together make sense. And so a lot of what we do at The Stew is really bringing some unconventional pieces together to all make it make sense. And that's sort of the magic behind what we do.
Yeah, we definitely feel that magic for sure. I want to move us in a little different direction around inspiration.
Yeah.
What's an unexpected source of inspiration that has influenced your approach at The Stew?
Yeah. I mean, I think that maybe it's not, maybe it's unconventional or sort of like a weird approach when I think about inspiration. There are a few things. So I think my family plays a big part of that. I grew up and was raised by women. And so like black women very much influence how I think about the world. The women in my family taught me a lot. Like, it's super important to be kind. It is important to be able to create time out of the day to have a meal with one. A lot of this comes from my great aunt. My great aunt was, at this point, 90-something-year-old woman who every single day, no matter what day it was, maybe Friday she would take our day off, but every single day I would come home from school and there would be a meal made every time. And I knew that this was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And by 6 o'clock, I was hungry again. But nevertheless, I knew that if I didn't get there at that particular time, I wasn't going to have this meal. But what it taught me was no matter what the hell was going on, it was always enough time to have a meal with your family. It's always enough time to sit at a table and have a home-cooked meal and an experience with someone else. And that's what I try to bring to what we do at The Stew. It's always time to create community. So I think that's one bit of it is her. She taught me the community aspects early. She taught me kindness. And she taught me really the importance of prioritizing the people that you care about. When I think about non-familial influence, as a kid, I would watch a lot of cooking shows. And hardly any of them had black men in it. And it definitely didn't have black women. And so when I think about some of the inspiration around it, and I don't want to communicate that what we do is just about food, because it isn't. It's just a centerpiece. But I think about chefs that really inspire me. Some of those folks black, some of them not. And so some of the inspiration is watching people get to travel the world and experience food in a new way. As a kid, as much as my aunt was great, we ate the same things all the time. Like our palate wasn't refined. I hate that word, but our palate wasn't one that reflected like global experiences. And so when I got older, I was like, yo, I could eat this and experience this and travel this place and learn about this thing, and these things are really the same thing. I laugh at Tristan. He always talks about this thing that everybody eats the same things, just different ways. I want to be able to experience that as much as possible. I don't care how redundant it is. And so part of the inspiration is being able to see the world and experience the world through food. To be able to taste and eat my way through the world is something that's really important to me. So that's also an inspiration. Then I think the last piece of it is, I believe that, young people, millennials, people my age who sort of sit at that cusp, like, we deserve not to be lonely. We deserve to have meaningful experiences. We deserve to break bread with one another in a way that's very thoughtful, intentional. And I believe that the things that myself and my team do, we really help to facilitate that. And I want to see that throughout the world.
That's beautiful, and I think food can be the conduit to doing that for sure.
Yeah, you add some music to that. You add sort of like just intentionality. You think about a beautiful space. You think about like, oh man, I'm gonna have this flower here because it makes the space look a particular way. Or the smell of that flower complements the smell of the apples that we're making for that meal today. Like I want us to be thinking about all of those things. And so that's really the sort of inspiration behind it, because it gives me the opportunity to be creative in a way that, I don't always get to be on a regular basis.
Is there a meal or food tradition that you feel symbolizes the spirit of the stew? I know you talked about your aunt B.
Mm-hmm.
Can you get into that a little bit, or is it from that? It could be something totally different, but is there a meal or a food tradition? If it's dinner, then that's fine, and we can kind of skip that. But do you feel like that embodies the spirit of the stew?
Yeah. So I think this is about an evolution of a meal that I've experienced. So as a kid, my aunt, well, a few of my aunts, they would make a soup dish, and it's one of the most simple things. It's chicken, rice, and a broth. Got some onions. Hell, I probably didn't have garlic because my family wasn't using that for real. And as a kid, it reminds me of home. It's comforting, it's hearty, very simple. My family didn't use a lot of seasonings. They seasoned their food, but it wasn't a wide range. But when I think about like a meal that just played a significant part in my life, it was that, because we would always have it. It was very cheap to make, and all my family could partake on that for a few days. When I think about sort of the evolution of that meal, I'll tell you why this evolution is particularly funny later, but curry chicken, rice and peas. But when I think about the most important representation of it, it's the curry. It's like a fusion of cultures, a fusion of flavors. It requires you to be intentional about like how you mix those flavors together. When you make a curry, you should be thinking about the steps, and then they all come together to create something that's very beautiful. And so what I really like us to sort of like harken back to is like when we're at the stew, it's like, okay, all these things are about intentions. It's about bringing it together. It's about facilitating very simple things that become very beautiful. And so I would say curry chicken is a good representation of that. If I'm on the Caribbean front, oxtails, things that come in one pot where you got to mix a bunch of flavors together. Got to make it a little spicy, but you also got to think about what's the layer, like 2 layers down. We don't really think about that when we cook on a regular basis. It's usually like, I just need to eat. And one of the things I really think about beyond just the act of food is like, how do you create and put love into the things that you do? And I think that also represents the stew. I think the stew is an embodiment of the love that I want to share to the rest of the world. It's about being able to like reflect out the things that I want others to feel from me.
Who are the folks that connect with the stew the most? How do you tailor your experiences to keep empowering the community?
Yeah, the people who would connect to the stew the most are folks who are looking for meaningful connection, who don't want to eat alone, who believe that there is more to community than the party that you go to, who want to have meaningful conversations that transcend or translate one day interactions. Like the person who I am appealing to is someone who is looking for meaningful and long-term community. What that really looks like is I may go to this brunch today, but in a few weeks we will have a game night, or it'll be the pre-turn-up thing. Like I really want the stew to sort of like represent all the things that one wants to experience outside of like one-off transactions. That's really what it comes down to. We're not here for the one and done. This is like, how do I bring you along on a journey? How do I communicate that, I see and feel the things that you're trying to figure out and navigate? How do I bring back the nostalgia that we experienced as a kid? How do I make us have fun. Like I really want this to be representative of an environment where you get to just play and be, and when life was simple. How do we keep it fresh and intentional? We think about every detail. So I'm spending time with a bunch of folks. We're talking about, okay, this experience needs to look this way. It needs to feel this way. It needs to smell this way. We are thinking about the moment that you get there, but we've already thought about that well before you walk in the door. And so it's really about being thoughtful, being intentional, and using all the sort of like things that we know about community to create something new and fresh every single time. And also recognizing that we can't do that. I can't do that by myself. There are a number of people who make the stew possible. From the flyer that you see online to the table that's set to the meal that you have, there's someone who's a part of this. And I think the coolest part about this is that I get to do all of those things with people I care about. Oftentimes you got to go search to find that, and I am extremely grateful to have people in my life who are like, yo, I see your vision, I see this thing, even if it all ain't clear, I see it.
We were talking about empowering the community and what type of folks would connect with the stew the most, and so I would love to ask a bit around what drives your passion for this work and why is it so close to your heart?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I think about what drives me, I really have to go back to my childhood. So as a kid, I never really fit in. I was the kid that no one really like understood. My mother struggled to sort of like make sense of who I was. In her mind, she was like, yo, go be a boy, go play outside. And when I did, they're like, who the fuck, like, why? Like, you're weird. And so I just never really fit in. And so part of why this stew is important, or the passion behind it, is I don't want people to feel or experience what I felt growing up. I felt like an outsider. Never really felt like I had my people. And if I'm being honest, it's something that I've experienced most of my life. I am the person, I say that I'm the friend of all the friend groups. I don't really have, and I think that that's shifting and has shifted these days, but for most of my life, I wasn't the person who had solid group of people that I would spend my time with. In college, that existed somewhat, but when I think about the evolution of it, it just didn't exist in the same ways as others. And so the stew is really just a space for me to be able to create spaces for other folks who may feel like me, who are looking for intentional community, who are looking for a space that is thoughtful, and who are looking for people and like building a tribe. And I think the stew is a representation of that on one end. And then the other side is when we think about it from a workplace perspective, it's about centering and creating a perspective that you often don't get in the workplace. Because how many times do you ever feel like, they actually thought about me when they did this thing? Or how many like snafus that happen where companies have served the wrong meal, said the wrong thing, had to backtrack the thing? The stew helps those companies not have to make those mistakes again. And so when I think about the sort of the culmination, we are about creating space for folks to feel like they belong, both inside and outside their workplace.
And as we wrap, we'll move into like future aspirations and just more about your soul. And so, as you look into the future, do you have a personal motto or a vision that guides where you want to take the stew next?
Yeah, I don't even think it's about the stew. I think the thing that I've been saying for a long time is slow and steady wins the race. I don't always abide by that, but I believe that, all the things that I do are steps to help me get to the next place. When I was growing up, or even as an adult, people always be like, why'd you make that decision, or why you did this thing? Sometimes I don't know why, but there's something guiding me in a way that is like, you need to do this thing, or you gotta do it this way. And so I'm gonna always trust that instinct. I'm gonna know that, as much as I always want things fast and I want it to be quick, sometimes I gotta slow down. Sometimes I gotta just take a step back. I gotta go slow. It's like that stew, you can't the stew don't just appear, you gotta build it. When I think about when we talk about Haitian food, it's really about low and Honestly, man, I want a physical space. I want a warehouse that I convert into a multifaceted space, a coffee shop, dining experiences, a bed and breakfast inside of it. And I just want to be able to create and bring that to the world. I think, when you think about like Soho House, when you think about the gathering spot, both of those things are dope. They have really interesting elements, but neither one of them have great food elements. And so I want to have food be a centerpiece, but I also want to bring the intentional community part together. And I want to be able to create a space where all my people are able to eat also. And I don't mean just having a meal. I mean, my people are going to be at the center of building it. They're going to be at the center of designing it. They're going to be at the center of facilitating all things that happen in it. And so it's just going to be this place where all the people that I care deeply about get to come together, make their magic happen, and we just gonna keep building.
Thank you, Maurice. Really appreciate it. I think the folks really love it too. And that's a wrap.